people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Okay, we'll start with this. You may have heard that Naoya Inoue versus Murodjon Akhmadaliev Tokyo Showdown is now set for September 14th. And all Inoue has to do is make it there. Make it past Ramon Cardenas. Naoya Inoue has stuck to his outlined plan for the year. A showdown with Uzbekistan's Murodjon Akhmadaliev is up next for the reigning undisputed junior featherweight champion, provided he handles present-day business. With a win over Ramon Cardenas this Sunday, Inoue 29-0 with 26 knockouts, and Akhmadaliev will then meet in a WBA title consolidation bout. Done deal. Finally, Eddie Hearn, whose Matchroom Boxing co-promotes Akhmadaliev along with World of Boxing, revealed on Thursday Uzbek Power versus the Monster. Best fight in the division. Is that the case? Is this the best fight to make at 122 pounds? At least momentarily it is. Until the likes of, say, a Junto Nakatani or a Bam Rodriguez move into the super bantamweight division, until further notice, this is the best fight to make. Further details were not provided by Hearn or anyone else directly involved in the fight. However, Boxing Scene has received confirmation that it will take place on September 14th in Tokyo. Inoue first attempts his fourth defense of the undisputed junior featherweight crown and fifth overall defense of the WBC and WBO belts against San Antonio's Cardenas, 26-1 with 15 knockouts. ESPN will air their scheduled 12-round championship contest this Sunday from T-Mobile Arena in Vegas, Nevada. Inoue versus Akhmadaliev remains on course for the timeline set out by Inoue and promoter Hideyuki Ohashi. A former two-time strawweight champion before he founded Ohashi Boxing Gym, Ohashi Promotions, the ambitious plan calls for a minimum of 3 fights this year, with hopes of a 4th in December, depending on what happens in September. Inoue began the year with a 4th-round knockout of South Korea's Yi-Jun Kim on January 24th at Ariake Arena in Tokyo, Japan. Kim was a late replacement for Sam Goodman, Inoue's IBF mandatory challenger, who suffered 2 injuries in less than a month and thus lost out on the chance to cash in his lottery ticket. Now, as luck would have it, Sam Goodman is all healed up, all recovered, and set to return to action later on this month on the 14th in his native Australia, but he's lost his spot in the rotation for the Inoue sweepstakes. Not that I think he really wanted it. The fact that Inoue sought to first face Goodman never sat well with Akhmadaliev, the current interim WBA champion. The 2016 Olympic bronze medalist has been Inoue's mandatory since a December 2023 knockout win over Kevin Gonzalez in Glendale, Arizona. Inoue Akhmadaliev was twice ordered by the WBA in 2024. On both occasions, concessions were made for Inoue to face another opponent. Now for what isn't being said, and what's not in the article, while MJ did become Inoue's mandatory in December of 2023, months before that, Sam became his mandatory. In June of that same year, after he defeated America's own Reese Alim via a split decision. You let MJ tell the story, and he's making it like Inoue had a choice. Inoue already had 2 mandatories in the queue before MJ even came into it. Luis Nery via the WBC, then Sam Goodman via the IBF, then MJ via the WBA. So what about all those other guys that he ended up fighting? Yi-Jun Kim, TJ Doheny. Late replacements and improvisations in the absence of Sam Goodman, who kept getting injured and kept delaying things? That's what those guys were. Inoue was first permitted to face TJ Doheny in a voluntary title defense despite the fact his ordered mandatory with Akhmadaliev was due to head to a per-spit hearing. Their clash last September saw Inoue prevail via a 7th-round knockout, but his team never bothered to revisit plans to face the Uzbek southpaw. A consolidation prize was offered to Akhmadaliev in the form of an interim title fight. He made the most of it, as he comprehensively beat Ricardo Espinoza last December 14th in Monte Carlo, Monaco. Inoue was initially due to face Goodman 10 days later, but the event was postponed by exactly 1 month due to a cut suffered by the unbeaten Aussie. A repeat occurrence just a few weeks later prompted Inoue to proceed with the voluntary defense against Yi-Jun Kim, along with aggressive plans to become the most active male champion in the sport with 4 potential fights this year. Akhmadaliev's name was mentioned as part of that plan, though not the primary target. It led to another round of interviews conducted by Hearn to keep his fighter's name in the spotlight, even if not in the ring. I've seen the interviews that Eddie held after Inoue's last fight. Akhmadaliev previously told Boxing Scene, "It's not like I spend all my time online, but I heard what he said, and he is my co-promoter for a reason. He does a great job promoting my name." Akhmadaliev has not fought since his above-mentioned win over Espinoza. There was loose talk of his landing on this weekend's undercard, though such rumors were immediately dismissed. Instead, the 30-year-old southpaw will become the sport's most interested observer, given what's at stake for his immediate future. Now we come to it. MJ Akhmadaliev's shot at the big time, a chance to win all the marbles, all the belts at 122 in one fell swoop. Few passing thoughts. I believe that MJ Akhmadaliev can at least make things interesting, the way Luis Nery did for a split second when he scored that flash knockdown. That short-lived success that he had early in his fight with Inoue. I do think MJ can make things a bit more interesting than that. Not necessarily with a knockdown per se. It doesn't have to be with a knockdown so much as giving Inoue something to think about, because MJ is a well-schooled boxer, a standout amateur. That's why Matchroom signed him, and that's how he became a unified champion at this weight very early in his career. He is a good fighter. Good enough that I think Inoue will respect him, and we will see that in the early goings of the match as Inoue tries to get his distance down, find his groove, and find his man. I do have Inoue winning the fight, but I expect it to be harder than the Luis Nery fight, and certainly harder than the TJ Doheny and Yi-Jun Kim fights. I do expect this fight to perhaps be the hardest fight Inoue's had at this weight. Maybe. Upstairs at Junior Middle, unfinished business. Tim Tszyu is catapulted back into title fight as rematch of Bloody War is now confirmed. Tim Tszyu has been sensationally catapulted back into a blockbuster world title rematch with towering American Sebastian Fundora, with a replay of their 2024 bloodbath likely to take place in Vegas during the summer. Summer in America, winter in the Southern Hemisphere, winter in Australia. As first revealed by Fox Sports Australia, immediately after his most recent win over U.S. prospect Joey Spencer, Tszyu is set to return to the world's fight capital for a shot at redemption against the man who stole his crown in a bloody split decision war last March. They say that all things end. All things good, all things bad. Nothing lasts forever, and so it would seem that the funk that Tim Tszyu was in last year has come to an end, because he's back in the winner's bracket and he's got a chance at redemption. Moreover, a chance at revenge. Contracts have been signed between both Tszyu and the towering 27-year-old U.S. southpaw, who famously upset him for both the WBO and WBC titles, with America's PBC officially announcing the fight on Wednesday morning on social media with the tagline,
unfinished business.
No official fight date has been set, but multiple U.S. outlets overnight said the fight would potentially happen in July or August, with Fundora set to vacate his WBO title, scrapping a planned bout with Puerto Rican prospect Xander Zayas, and put his WBC strap on the line against Tszyu.
U.S. boxing journalist Lance Pugmire was the first to suggest early on Wednesday morning, Australian time, that Fundora will not participate in the scheduled purse bid for his mandatory defense against Puerto Rican sensation Xander Zayas. Instead, Fundora will face Tszyu with only the WBC belt up for grabs.
The American's agent also told Boxing Scene that nothing has yet been finalized, with 3 dates in July and August under consideration. This is the fight everyone wants to see. Lukowicz said of Fundora versus Tszyu 2, it will be raining blood. And yet they spent weeks negotiating with Xander Zayas before we got to this point, and before that fight collapsed.
What was supposed to herald a partnership between the PBC and Top Rank to do more fights amongst themselves moving forward.
And so with those things in mind, you wonder how long Team Fundora had a Tim Tszyu rematch in their back pocket.
Were they ever serious about fighting Xander?
It is also being reported that Fundora's decision to take on Tszyu, who sits at number 6 with the WBC, but is now unranked by the WBO, means that he will be stripped of the WBO title, leaving Zayas to face number 2, Jorge Garcia Perez, for the vacant strap. Purse bids for that vacant championship bout are expected to go ahead in place of Fundora versus Zayas, with any promoter free to stake their claim to the contest. Simpson Boxing and Zayas' promoters, Top Rank, had previously failed to agree terms for the WBO-ordered bout. Speaking immediately after the Soul Taker beat Spencer via brutal stoppage in Tszyu Castle earlier this month, No Limit CEO George Rose confirmed to Fox Sports Australia that talks were already underway for a Las Vegas showdown with Fundora sometime during the U.S. summer. Rose added that it was through the Towering Inferno straps that Tszyu could then earn his way back into the U.S. blockbusters he has always craved, including, most notably, Jermell Charlo. He's supposed to be coming back. He's supposed to be coming back to junior middle.
The fight with Joey Spencer was at the beginning of last month, approximately 4 weeks ago.
So that if George Rose then said that talks had already started for a Sebastian Fundora rematch, that would then mean the whole time this Xander Zayas situation has been going on, Sebastian has been charting a course elsewhere. So maybe he was never serious about facing Xander Zayas.
Not if you've been talking to Timmy all this time. Tim Tszyu himself also revealed after the Spencer win that Fundora was the man he most wanted to fight next, despite suggestions he was already locked in for a showdown with American great Keith Thurman on the Gold Coast in July.
Yeah, I was never convinced that was going to happen.
Tszyu also revealed in his post-fight press conference that the weight cut had been one of the toughest of his career and suggested a move to middleweight could take place within the year.
As a result, a win over Fundora could mean Tszyu then just has one massive super welterweight defense potentially against Charlo or even Thurman before then moving up into the middleweight division. Regardless, the Fundora announcement represents a huge shot at redemption for the 30-year-old Sydney-sider, who was thought to be angling for an Australian headliner against American Keith Thurman on the Glitter Strip in July.
Instead, the Soul Taker will look to become a 2-time world champion in the United States. Incredibly, the announcement comes only days after WBO officials announced a proposed bout between Fundora and number 1 contender, the undefeated Zayas, would be going to purse bid within a few days.
Making the announcement via social media, WBO President Gustavo Olivieri suggested a purse bid would occur next week and be live streamed with Fundora to get 75% of any winning bid, while Zayas would receive the remaining quarter. Instead, Team Tszyu appeared to have swept in and jagged a title shot for their man. Speaking on Australia's The Punch podcast only recently, Fundora hinted that a rematch with Tszyu was in the works, while also disputing suggestions his team had initially opted out of an agreed rematch clause.
Of course. Fundora said when asked about the possibility of a rematch, that's a great fight. There's a bunch of fights in this division that we are in the position to get. It's just if the other side wants to take it as well, but I'm pretty sure the Australians would love it. I think it's a great fight. Immediately following Fundora's upset win over Tszyu, the question of a rematch clause was raised. However, the champ stressed there was nothing, contractually, that demanded it.
In other words, they didn't have it on paper. And if you don't have it on paper, it really doesn't count.
People talk too much, and people talk a lot when they don't know. He said if suggestions of a potential rematch clause had been broken, there was nothing in the contract for me. I never seen anything like that. You gotta ask the source yourself, either Tim or me, and we know what was going on. I would like that fight, though. I definitely like that fight.
Sebastian's recent comments should dispel all the confusion that this fight is coming to us as a result of Tim activating his rematch clause.
According to Sebastian, there wasn't one.
For Tszyu, the Fundora rematch represents his shot at re-entering the top echelon of world boxing following consecutive title losses to both Fundora, then IBF champion Bakhram Murtazaliev in October. Earlier this month, the Sydney-sider initially bounced back with a brutal stoppage win over hyped American prospect Joey Spensor, whose corner threw the towel after only 4 rounds. Immediately afterwards, Tszyu was touted for a showdown against future Hall of Famer Thurman, who only weeks earlier ended his own 3-year hiatus from the ring with a big stoppage over Tszyu's no-limit stablemate Jock Brarvis.
So where does this recent development leave Keith Thurman?
Does anybody really care? It now appears Tim Tszyu has sidestepped Thurman and will go straight into the rematch with Fundora, the 6'6" Californian who handed the Australian boxing superstar the first loss of his career.
And so then, like now, instead of facing Keith Thurman, he's fighting Sebastian again.
Because remember, initially that's who he's supposed to fight. Then he ended up with Sebastian. The difference between then and now is Sebastian will not be a late replacement for Timmy. Timmy's gonna have a full camp for this guy, and that's a big difference.
Huge.
Because up until that point, he had been getting ready for a 5'7" orthodox fighter in his mid-30s, and at the last minute, he ends up with a 6'6" southpaw who's in his physical prime, the exact opposite of what he was getting ready for.
And even with the late replacement, while Tim Tszyu still had his vision, he was able to do a lot of damage very quickly. So I happen to think he can win.
Psychologically, I think that Tim needs this fight. More than an excursion with Keith Thurman, he needs to avenge the loss to Sebastian.
To come full circle, to come to terms with it all.
I've spoken to so many people since that fight who try to pretend that the freak accident with the elbow didn't have a huge effect on that fight. All that blood streaming down Tim's face and how he really couldn't see.
They'd rather believe that Tim is just a hype job.
People that act like it doesn't matter, that Sebastian Fundora was quite literally the polar opposite of everything Tim was getting ready for. Sebastian's an awkward assignment all on his own because of his statuesque frame, but as a late replacement and the exact opposite of what Tim was getting ready for, it's even worse.
But I suppose that doesn't matter either.
So this is Timothy's chance to silence those critics, silence those naysayers who think that because of a freak accident in that fight, he's nothing but an Aussie hype job. And that the fight is happening in America, not in Tim's native Australia, helps the optics of it all. That he's coming back here after a horrific 2024 spent in America, he's willing to come back and fight that same guy.
This is his chance to really get back on track. And if it were somebody else, I would advise against it.
I would advise that maybe he take it easy. Maybe you take on Michael Zarafa before things get a bit more serious. But because it's Sebastian, him specifically,
Timmy needs this.
I think he does. And because the circumstances are slightly different than they were before, that he's gonna have a full camp for this guy now. It won't be impromptu.
He can win. I haven't lost faith in him.
I'm actually looking forward to this rematch.